program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hey everybody, welcome to Watch Mojo's Inside Podcast. I'm your host Rob, and with me today is Ashkan Karbis-Frushan, Watch Mojo CEO and co-founder. How's it going, Ash? It's almost Halloween. Do you have any spooky plans lined up?
My spooky plans for Halloween are basically being a chauffeur, driving my gals if they still go trick-or-treating around. This year I may have my dog Lily on me as I'm driving around or strutting her around town. But no, that's basically it. I mean, I would love 1 year to go crazy and buy like 100 pumpkins and give out like big candies, but I still have like parental duties, so that will have to wait. How about you? Any big plans?
I always dreamt of being that guy who makes the big haunted house in his front yard, but unfortunately my tiny yard can't accommodate something like that, but maybe one day it'll happen. My plans are just to take the kids trick-or-treating in our neighborhood. We have a pretty fun neighborhood for that. A lot of people are into it.
I've been very lucky, like lived in neighborhoods that go all out. It's funny, you know, that meme, like, oh, if I'm ever rich, I won't tell anybody, but there will be signs. Yeah, I mean, I'll be giving out like Toblerone style like candies if I could. But anyway, Halloween is also weird in Montreal because it's like I love fall and it's beautiful, but it's always rainy and wet, so you can't even really enjoy it. Half the time, it's kind of, you know, it's a bit of a wet towel, but it's
a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get. Well, today we're talking about the terrifying topic of media.
Nice, touche.
And so for anybody who hasn't been following along, the Inside Podcast is where each week we dive into a new topic. We started this by doing 20 episodes on YouTube, and we are now branching off each week into different territory. This week we're covering media, and we're going to talk about, I guess, the past, present, and future of media. So let's set the stage.
Sure. By the way, with puns like that, soon you're going to be asking for a raise. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So
don't give me any ideas.
Yeah, exactly. So, we started with 20 episodes covering YouTube, which is now the main platform in media and entertainment, through the WatchMojo experience. And then we kind of went through America, capitalism, censorship, AI. The AI one got a lot of feedback and comments still coming in and questions. And then we did the Habs because the NHL season started. We're in Montreal. We did the Expos because of Netflix. So admittedly, we wanted to go back closer to our core and kind of draft off of the AI episode. So let's start a little bit, past this prologue. So, you could go back to like the Gutenberg press, like the Bible. Okay, it was verbal, but eventually it was written, the Quran, the Word of God, and all that. Like print media, at the end of the day, communications. Print is the oldest media. And in fact, I would say what differentiates humans from animals in the Harari book, Sapiens, is like humans were storytellers. That's actually like one of his thesis is the only thing that sets us apart and allowed humans to prevail over bigger elephants and, lions and all that was because we could gather people and we could strategize and do more, but it goes back to storytelling. So storytelling is part of the human DNA. And you start off with print. We don't need to go through all that, but I mean, obviously here you had the Pulitzers and the Hearsts and others. Print started off, obviously, newspapers. Yellow journalism actually comes just from the color of the paper. It connotes something else. And then the print folks were like, hey, maybe we should do magazines, still using the same distribution, same media form, but a little bit, different layout and different experience. And then you had radio. So radio was the kind of next in line. And then you had television. And what's interesting with television is it started off network. There were like 3 channels in the US, ABC, NBC, CBS, eventually Fox. But what's funny is the first TV shows were really just radio shows that were recorded with video. That's why they were all kind of a bit talking head, boring. And even feature films, the first ones were effectively almost like theatrical plays that were just recorded. It wasn't, multiple scenes and all that. But to kind of move over history quickly, what ended up happening, which is pertinent for today's show, is if we double click at television.
Yeah.
So television started off with those 3 networks. And then Yvonne, if you're kind enough to load up, and then eventually you had cable launch. I always reference MTV and ESPN as 2 examples of cable channels. And so what happened is, with the advent of cable, 500 channels on and nothing on, like the dial now, you could go and watch the hunting channel, the cooking channel. In aggregate, yes, cable became bigger than network, which was kind of free over the air, the little rabbit antennas. Cable became both a bigger ecosystem and in aggregate actually commanded more attention. So next slide. So history does not necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes. What ended up happening is all of this extra choice of programming just led to a growth in total consumption. So the amount of time that audiences would sit around and watch shows, programming on TV actually doubled in 50 years, and it was fueled by cable. So there's a lot of graphs. These are graphs I've, kind of aggregated over 20 years. There's a link to a Google Slides in the comments if anybody is interested. It's an open document. You use it for your research. Submit it to ChatGPT. So we're going to now talk a little about, so like you growing up, like, did you watch more the ABC, NBCs, or were you watching, like, I know we're in Canada, so were you watching the ESPN equivalent TSN or the MTV equivalent Much Music?
It was more of like the ABC, NBCs. Yeah.
Right, so you were actually a network. Okay,
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's not really surprising that like WatchMojo ended up being what it was, because as much as I watched ABC, NBC, CBS, whether for news or the sitcoms or just for their variety of programming, yeah, I mean, I kind of realized that both magazines were one inspiration for me working at a convenience store. Like the editorial tone of WatchMojo was obviously magazine-esque, but like the informational foundation was the encyclopedias that I kind of devoured. And then obviously, so I grew up really watching more the TSN and the Much Musics and occasionally Travel Channel and all that. And I think that's what I kind of saw if you fast forward with YouTube. When YouTube came along, obviously at prima facie, at face value, people were like, oh, this is like dogs on skateboards, or cat falling off a chair, or random user generated UGC content. And I was like, here's one takeaway. I was like, people are missing the point of content and media and distribution. Yes, content is king. When Sumner Redstone said that, he didn't really mean that content has the upper hand and leverage vis-a-vis distribution. He meant that with new distribution, there's new shelves for your content, right? So if Sumner Redstone had bought a chain of movie theaters and then eventually acquired MTV, and he built Viacom into the powerhouse that he was, all he meant was, hey, if I had a movie that I used to charge $10 a person to go watch, I can now put this on, cable and generate an extra window of revenue. So content is king. But the reality is the distribution platforms have always prevailed. The reason, for example, why, and I have the book right there, why Henry Luce built a dominant media empire with Time eventually launching Fortune, SI, People, Life, Travel and Leisure, and many others, was in distribution. Yes, they had the relationship with viewers, the relationship with marketers, but in his book, there's this brilliant passage where Henry Luce negotiated a preferential treatment for and rate from the US Post Office in order to not pay as much as his competition. And that really is what allowed him to really scale. That is ultimately what allowed him to launch new magazines at like a marginal cost that was advantageous to his competition. So as we look at what's happened now in the last decade with the rise of streaming, that's really the lens, which is who really has the power. Is it the media guys that own the content, or is it the big tech platforms that not only have the tech stack to deliver rich, big files to anybody around the world, but they also have the audience ultimately?
Right. And so, yeah, you mentioned streaming, but something else that you mentioned before is how television was able to capture people's attention and like grow their audience of people who would not otherwise be watching. But that's not really the case anymore, because people's time is so precious. So it's a battle for attention. So how has the game changed now, where there isn't really any untapped attention to kind of like garner from people? It's kind of already consumed. So like, what's the situation? Social media has also played a big part in this, taking eyeballs away from television and competing with streaming platforms now. So what's the attention game like these days?
Well, yeah, I mean, you raised like three really excellent points that are, I would say, everybody's like, this is the most important. These are three important points. First of all, yes, I think with linear distribution, linear programming, we've heard the example. If Seinfeld's on at 9, Cheers is on at 8, whatever you put at 8:30 will get its audience. Now, if the content sucks or if it's totally jarring, if one is for one demo and one is for a totally different demo, you would have maybe not executed as well. But I think the reality is that a lot of bad programming kind of made it to the airways and stayed on the airways because of the traditional way. You had to line up talent, you had to write the screenplays, you had to produce it, you had to commit to a season with 10 episodes. So there was a lot of programming that had the time to kind of find its legs. Nowadays, it's different. There's so much programming being greenlit, or there was so much programming in the 2010s during the streaming wars and peak TV era that you had shows that would get greenlit and then 2 episodes on streaming, crap viewership, and the studio would just be like, let's shut this down. It's easier. So what changed is the on-demand nature of the web. So the web, and let's go to YouTube, and then YouTube also broke all of the gatekeeper kind of power. It was no longer a number of studio execs and their lackeys, or Harvey Weinstein, which woman is going to sleep with me? Like the whole antiquated, horrible Hollywood dynamics of power, nepotism, kekistocracy, the worst people running a thing. Thank God that's being washed away. Hollywood, nobody said it's saints. Nobody said these are like, principled people, horrible people, like in any industry. But because of the sheer demand that everybody wants to be a storyteller, everybody wants to be a star, it just created this very like fake, that's why people call Hollywood fake, this kind of like fake demand and supply where you didn't necessarily have the best shows or the best stories, but it was just like some reason something got approved and it lasted. So the first one was the death of linear programming, the rise of on-demand. The second one is this YouTube, what YouTube symbolizes, this democratization. And I've said this before, this is a big paradox or hypocrisy. AOL was a walled garden. Facebook is a walled garden. Google search is a black box. YouTube's algorithm, good luck figuring it out. You can imagine. I mean, we know what the key levers are, but that doesn't mean you can hack it, which is a good thing. So the second one is this democratization. The third one is, I would say, a byproduct of the YouTube revolution, which is the definition of what is a celebrity, the barometer of what is quality. That's gone out the door. And I think COVID accelerated that when all of a sudden you would see celebrities without the heavy makeup in a Zoom video that then also further accelerated that. So you've really seen a technological, an economic, and a sociological, a consumer behavior shift. And so in many ways, television, you could argue, it's like television is dead, long live television. The difference is sometime after COVID, and I would say it was probably 23, second half, television really took the baton from, YouTube really took the baton from television. That's when YouTube became a much bigger ecosystem in terms of ad dollars. And even YouTube Premium, if you pay as a subscription to skip ads, that is crushing it. And so YouTube is like the dominant thing and everybody is playing catch up. And the reality is most of the traditional media companies are simply ill-equipped to, be relevant on YouTube because it's not their DNA.
Yeah. And so media has the kind of a cyclical nature to it also. And you kind of see like elements of traditional television kind of creeping back into online platforms and streaming, and even in the ways where like Disney Plus is now packaging multiple services within their offerings, which kind of emulates like what you would get with a cable package back in the 90s or whatever. So like where are we headed now, seeing as that media does tend to repeat these cycles?
For sure. So everything is cyclical. Everything, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And there's always like a regression to the mean. In finance, you go through periods where companies merge, nonstop mergers, nonstop acquisition. And then there's another period where you've gobbled so much, suffer indigestion, and you realize some synergies and fits were nonsense. So then you start to divest. So then you go through a period of disposition, divestments, sales, yada, yada. So media is really no different, right? So I think cable just got a bit clunky it got a bit convoluted. There was way too much programming. It wasn't necessarily even good. I mean, do we need more ridiculousness on MTV these days? You know what I mean? Like, it's that you don't look at that scheduling grid and go, this is what people want. There's clearly some nonsense reason that content is being shoved down your throat. So let's talk about the first point you made. When we looked at like the history of YouTube, at a given point, there was a genre or a format or like a category of creators that kind of were like leading the charge. You know, at one point or another, it was the do-it-yourself folks. At another, it was the vloggers who were just giving like, you know, their opinions and thoughts on something. At one point, it was the Let's Play crowd. At another point, we got ahead of the lists. You know, we were doing lists all the time, but we caught that lightning in a bottle. And then if you look at Mr. Beast, I mean, that's kind of like, you know, extortion, blackmail, philanthropy, whatever you call it. You know, it's like gun to your head. You might get a prize, or you may be in a dungeon, and God bless him. So what I'm getting at is there was a period in the late 2010s when big media, and I called it the Empire Strikes Back period, where Disney said, hey, why is WatchMojo serving fans of Marvel? We have this IP. This is our trademark. Let's launch Marvel on YouTube. And good for them. They got 20 million subscribers, you know, like pretty quickly. You had a lot of others. COVID again. What COVID did is all the late night show, they embraced it, you know, and that's why you coming out of COVID, those late night show hosts, God rest their soul, as Trump is effectively kiboshing them one by one. But those guys are really, really programming for YouTube, not so much TV, whether they admit it or not. And so I am one of those people that says, no, there's a lot of crap in traditional, but there's a lot of good stuff. And there's always a flight to quality. So if you make that content available to people, either on Netflix, Disney Plus, YouTube, wherever, your own website, there will be demand for it. So yes, there was a period in the late 2010s when traditional media blew up its business. And remember that pyramid that talks about super premium on top, UGC at the bottom, and we focus in the middle. That was no longer really realistic in the late 2010s because traditional media saw the dollars online through SVOD subscriptions or even AVOD, ad supported. So they started to embrace it. So that's when I alluded to the two spheres that were kind of becoming an eclipse. The people with the media, the IP, the catalogs, and then those with distribution. Some, like Apple, just license content. They're like, hey, we'll commission this show. Others maybe bought one or the other, you know, like others invested. Paramount launched Paramount Plus. They have 200 million subscribers now. Good for them. So I do think, though, that this talk about traditional is dead is nonsense. I think there's good will survive. You know, what is really happening, though, is this blurring of, if you're young, if you're a 14-year-old and you're like 6, 7, 6, like if that's your world right now, first of all, you should stop with the 6, 7 nonsense. But I'm just saying, if that's your world, I don't really think you view it any differently if you're watching Yellowstone or your favorite YouTuber who's just like doing some random video. You're smart enough to understand, hey, Game of Thrones was like a $200 million production. And here you got Joey dropping, you know, like whatever, a snail in somebody's drink and getting a reaction. But to land my plane, you are right. That ultimately everybody's fighting for attention, mind share, watch time. And that's the real battle because there's so much information. People are entertained through social. People are entertained through, you know, content, sharing, their friends, their strangers. And I think this is the main thing that historically Hollywood hates. But also, if we're going to be fair, a lot of YouTubers, I'll call them out, they're a bit hypocritical because now that those YouTubers have the audience and the following, they don't necessarily want a democratic platform because they're like, well, why am I going to give up any of my, you know, whereas I'm like, I want everybody to do well. You know, if people are putting good content online, a rising tide lifts all boats. But, you know, some YouTubers may not have that perspective. So they're just like, hey, we're the celebrities. Let's close the door behind us. Right. So it's just a natural progression. Just Hollywood is a bit more caught off guard because their entire production, their entire slates are not adapted for this reality of quick. In the 2010s, understandably, the Black Lives Movements matter, the Me Too movement, wanting to give an opportunity to LGBTQ voices. All of that had merit at its core. Now, it went overboard where, you know, it was like, you don't wear the ribbon. Why don't you wear the ribbon? I mean, when Seinfeld made fun of the AIDS ribbon, they were like a bit, you know, ahead of their times for the ridiculousness that we entered. But this is why Disney a month ago, they're like, we brought on these 2 new execs because we're just looking for stories for men 13 to 24. Yeah, let me guess why, because you ignored this crowd serving, nothing wrong with this, the gays, the blacks, the Muslims, the Hasidic, but the white man kind of was overlooked. Huge opportunity, right? And those companies are not ready for that because they were developing, which is like writing the outlines, writing the scripts, casting, all that nonsense that takes forever. So they were planning their slate thinking that they were in this kind of like woke era, and their development pipeline is a bit kind of caught off guard. You know, if you came out now with like a Muslim, lesbian, black, handicapped person's challenge, great story, but I don't know if that has really that much demand for it, if we're going to be honest, right? Because it was always force-fed. There was a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode that they were reenacting a development meeting in Netflix, and I mean, you saw that. There was like a person in a wheelchair, a black person, a lesbian person. It was like all the stereotypes. Blame Larry David, don't blame me. But so Hollywood now is screwed. Hollywood is screwed because they blow up their business models. Their slate is not really ready for 2025. Whereas people are just looking for an escapism, and social media gives you that and then some.
So something else that this battle for attention has created is different like polarized types of media. Like now we have the super short form with the TikTok and you know the YouTube shorts and everything, and then the really long form, like you can watch a 6-hour documentary on I don't know, like anything on YouTube. So what does that tell you about people's attention, and has that created new opportunities? I'm sure it has, but like how does legacy media fit into the landscape when there are more people interested in like super short and super long content rather than what's in the middle?
Yeah, so big media just has to realize that their future will be smaller than their past. They may not accept that, you know, and I'm not saying it can't bounce back. Like record labels, they went through a period of shrinking and then they're growing again. But I absolutely think that as much as I hate to see my peers and colleagues at Paramount losing jobs or Disney a few years ago, bro, your company's hired way too many people, and there's too many people doing too many specialized things, which is not really necessary, right? And that reflects unions. It reflects just quality control, where you're like, everybody's a specialist. You just look at, you know, making sure that like the food arrives on time. Whereas like in this new 247 agile era, it's go, 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 right? So I think just out of the gates, traditional media is just at a disadvantage for those reasons, because they're carrying debt, they're carrying heavy expenses. There's no amount of cutting that will do it. But to your point, so when I say that like YouTube or just the internet is replicating cable, if we had this conversation 30 years ago, you could have asked the exact same thing about cable, saying, but isn't it really weird? Like there's a show dedicated just to fishing. Or isn't it really weird? There's a whole channel that's all about hunting. Isn't it weird? There's like a channel that just shows the words of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I would have said, well, it's cable. That cable channel does not need the 20 million people that CBS needs to tune in. If they get 30,000 for certain shows and they have their hit shows with 200,000, everybody turns to listen to Jesus Christ talk, let's say. That's their equivalent of the Seinfeld finale. They could survive, right? So what cable did by building these niche, more fragmented channels that kind of had their raison d'etre, and they had their focus, and they built, you know, they carved up a profitable. Now, these were all owned by a few people, right? That's why like Discovery might have had 10 of these channels. That's why Viacom owned BET and Nick and VH1 and MTV. I mean, the idea was individually, it was hard. It's kind of like websites. The same reason why Ziff Davis owns IGN and they own a bunch of other websites. But so, yes, I think what we are now seeing is when like viral videos started, like let's say 15 years ago to go into the mainstream, people used to say, oh, these viral videos have kind of replaced the cigarette break, right? Like where instead of like you have 5 minutes, you go out on your shift, your break to have a cigarette if you smoke, and then you come back. They were like, oh, now people, or the analogy of going in your bathroom, instead of going to the restroom for 2 minutes, you might disappear for 15 minutes because you're on your phone. So yes, I do think though, and this is something that we not struggle, but I had to kind of like have a come to Jesus moment with the team. We're competing with everybody. We're competing. When Marvel embraced YouTube and said we're going to have a channel on YouTube, that was competition, you could argue. I don't think it was competition. It was complementary, but people don't generally watch two things at once. But so today, these media companies have to understand that like a viewer, they just want escapism or information. They no longer are reliant on the traditional media guys, you know, and now AI adds a whole other dynamic where, you know, you can extract the information. Like I cook a lot. When I'm just like, how long do I bake this mac and cheese in the oven and for how long? I've already made the food. I don't want a story of how, you know, Josephine, the author, grew up in the New England Falls and her grandma would make. I'm like, shut up. Temperature, time, right? And AI does that. Yeah. So I think media, even like the Watch Mojos, like I'm not sitting here saying, oh, we're special. Like I think media companies just have to have this like kind of accepting of reality that to a user, to a viewer, there's really no difference between some random kid uploading some funny shorts of his mom falling asleep and, you know, him putting chips on her head versus Dune. It sounds blasphemy, but if you think that's blasphemous, you're fucked. Like you're dead. You're not gonna survive in media. You know.
I think your phone is going off there. Ash can hear it pretty loud. All good.
I didn't even hear it.
Yeah, I heard it in my headphones. I think it's vibrating on the table. All good though. Yvonne posted an interesting question here for us. He's asking, did short form content manage to split from this cyclical norm and make its own market and evolution? And if I could step in and give my thoughts on that, I think we've definitely seen already a kind of cyclical nature of short form content in that we started with Vine, where it was like 10 or 15 seconds, and then it just got longer and longer. And then TikTok allowed you to post for 3 minutes and now 10 minutes. So it's kind of always changing. So there definitely has been an evolution because people don't want just one thing. They want to have a little bit of everything, I feel. So like that's pretty much where I stand on the short content.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about that is there is also this blurring. You know, people, organizations, they're driven by fear and greed and all that, envy. So some of that is like if you are like the best analogy was your Facebook, you're pretty strong in I was going to say facials, in social, Facebook, socials. And then you're like, oh, YouTube is crushing it in video, so we're going to launch Facebook Watch. But you don't have the temperament, you don't really have the team, you don't have a clue, you don't care about content. You just see the world as binary 1-0 bit code, let's say. So you don't really execute. You may have some hits, but you're not really committed to it. It was a bullshit attempt. And then you have Google, Alphabet. They're strong in search. They're strong in video. They envy Facebook crushing it, gaining. So they launched Google Plus. Not really well executed, super cocky and arrogant coming out of the gate. Like they had some God-given, like, you know, divine right to be in social. Had their asses served to them, and then they retreated. To their credit, they both were like, yeah, we're not going to out YouTube, and Google said we're not going to out social Facebook, right? But so the same thing in a way happens with length. If you're TikTok, you might have built a franchise around shorts, but at some point you have such a big audience, and we said it, distribution is what prevails. Distribution is the real foundation, the CADA of success. You really, really need that audience. You know, if a video is released and there's no audience, it's the tree that falls in the forest. Whereas like if you have crappy content but you have big distribution, you could figure it out, right? It's nobody wants to admit that, but if you have a ton of people just sitting there in a mall, they'll eat crap. They're not going to leave the mall to go like eat the Michelin star, right? Mm-hmm. But you could have the greatest restaurant. If there's no foot traffic, your food goes to waste. It's the same concept. But so what ended up happening is YouTube was like, well, we're being attacked, innovator's dilemma, by shorter content. So YouTube launched shorts. To their credit, they somehow managed to build that, not as a revenue thing, but revenue comes later, but even as like a viewership thing, without necessarily like destroying their business. So they get a lot of props for that. Like we look at the stats, we're like, wow.
Yeah.
And then I think if you're TikTok, you're like, well, we got the audience. Let's go longer form. Let's try to compete with YouTube. Now, YouTube's advantage is it has all the content. You know, it has all the content. Sure, it doesn't have all the content from Disney or Netflix,
but it has a lot.
Enough.
Yeah.
It has enough, you know, and then you get new like us. I admit that if we're doing top 10 Batman villains, that's like kind of shoulder programming to the Batman IP. But if we do top 10 battle scenes throughout history, that's not like that kind of is a compliment, is an alternative to watching a documentary on, you know, Netflix, right? So, and I think media is not used to that, you know, and I love that Hollywood, like I can contact a billionaire who's like doing cocaine off of a hooker's ass in the Caribbean. That guy will have the common sense to reply and be like, hey, what's up? Hollywood is still in their bullshit. Like, oh, here we are. Like, you can't reach us. We're too special. You send them an email. They'll send you an email back like, your email was deleted because it's like you're a bunch of retards. Like you don't realize what's happening.
Are they living in denial? Is it just like
no, they're living in denial. They're living in super denial. But it's like the frog in boiling water. If you know, like if you throw Google when they woke up one day and saw TikTok, it was like frog in boiling water. They're like, fuck, we have a problem with shorts. It's eating away. People are not watching our 10-minute videos. They're just watching 5 18-second videos while at the dentist waiting. So they got their act together and they were willing to blow up their business. I give them credit. You could criticize YouTube. Retards in Hollywood are sitting there going, our shit does not stink. We are better than you. And the world has moved on saying, you're not better than us. You fucking created the Harvey Weinsteins. You enabled this horrible ecosystem. But on top of that, you've been basically giving us like, great, no disrespect against Francis Coppola's daughter, but like, that's how Hollywood works. You know, it's like, oh, this gal, her aunt was this person. Her mother was that. Her name is different because she doesn't want it to be a Nepo baby. But there's no rhyme or reason. Now, you could make fun of the YouTubers, the weirdos, the crazies. Yeah, YouTube was all the rejects of Hollywood. You know, if you were obese, if you were fat, if you were autistic, if you were a lesbian, you were you were an Iranian entrepreneur. You know, it's like, hey, Hollywood's not going to open the door. I'll pursue YouTube. So YouTube and the internet is great for that. It scares traditional media. Traditional media is not really going to change, not going to adapt on time. Some will survive, but they'll survive in a much, much sleeker, smaller form.
Going back to streaming, so streaming platforms have been dominant, I guess, for like about 10 years at this point, probably the last decade. But is the foundation that they're built on as strong as the traditional media that came before it?
Okay, yes and no. It's actually weaker on one hand because television was bullshit. Television was there's 3 dials, 4 dials on the network, ABC, NBC, CBS. That's done. And then cable was like 500 channels, which seemed like a lot, but it was still only 500 channels. The web is an infinite, right? So you could argue that through artificial restrictions, TV was really a much more protected business racket. Fine. But the internet is both more solid and stable because one, it's democratic. So you don't really have this artificial nonsense. If people want to watch Stranger Things, it's probably because the audience really wants to. Americans would have never discovered Squid Games because, no disrespect, a white, likely male or female, but like a white American executive would have been like, this is cringe. What is this? Netflix hired a Korean exec. She went to develop the Korean market. And she found Squid Games and K-Demons or whatever. Like it's now like, you know, I go to the grocery store and there's Korean barbecue chips.
K-pop Demon Hunters.
K-pop Demon Hunters. There you go. Sorry, I'm aging myself. But the point is that no way would it have been discovered by the traditional way. It takes a different thinking. Now, where I think it's not as stable is like, if you look at HBO, if you look at Paramount Plus, if you look at Disney Plus, if you look at Tubi, you see where I'm going with this. There's always going to be an incremental streamer that could come and through a combination of lower prices or an odd show, get some market share, and then they will feed the beast. They will then have to go develop, hire development execs, hire production execs, go get licensing, do more marketing. And then eventually they hit a plateau because, as you said, consumers are not going to sign up to Paramount and Netflix and all that. So yes, there are now, regression to the mean, bundles, and there's also just cross partnerships where, you know, Comcast may say, we'll take our Peacock app, but we'll also allow people to get Paramount if they pay an extra dollars. I mean, that's happening in Canada now. Bell Media with their Crave, I get like a bunch of other SVOD services bundled into it, probably paying more now between cable, not satellite, but the internet and all, and whatever I pay. And it's a bit like the mall where, when you take an elevator up, an escalator up, if you want to keep going up, you got to go around and take the other escalator because they want you to see the stores. So there's always been like money to be made through friction, through inefficiency. But so I think it's a lot more stable because it's a democratic global platform, but it's also a lot less stable because it's not artificially constrained. It's not somebody or at the FCC or the CRTC in Canada that's sitting there and making a decision that could kill or help a given player.
Another question from Yvonne: has traditional media become just a bunch of corporate decisions, and is it sustainable? It seems like, traditional media is trying to launch similar, streaming platforms and stuff like that, but is it really just hollow business-minded decision making?
I studied finance. I could have studied accounting. I like economics. Don't let those motherfuckers run anything. They need to be in the room to help, to ask questions, to make sure crazies like me don't drive a company off the thing. But let me give you two very different examples of companies that fuck themselves over royally by letting an accountant or lawyer run them. One, Ford. Okay, forget that Henry Ford was a racist. Let's park that for a second. Henry Ford built an empire. He did all vertical integration. When he died, he had like hundreds of millions of dollars in cash in his headquarters because he didn't even want to trust banks or ever raise debt and all that. He was like, I'm going to walk to the beat of my own drum. I'm going to build our own steel. I'm going to build our own plastic. If there's a recession, the Great Depression, we could slow down, let all of our competition die. There was 100 car makers in 1900. Then there were the big three in 2000, Ford, GM, and Chrysler. What I'm getting at is once he died, and then the accountants and the lawyers and the real, like not the business people that are like business people, but they're creative or they're risk takers. But if you give the ball to an accountant or a finance, it's like a hammer. To a hammer, everything is a nail. So yes, creativity and risk taking goes down. Second example, Viacom, today known as Paramount. They brought in Philippe Dalman, who was a lawyer. I'm sure he's a fine guy. I'm not attacking him personally, but you couldn't find anybody that would say something positive about him because there was no reason why Viacom should be run by an accountant or a lawyer. Now, the problem is, and this I empathize, if you're publicly traded and you have shareholders and people can buy your shares, you need somebody that has a background in finance or accounting or legal to minimize stupidities coming out of your mouth, right? But you're also, the flip side is you can't have that person then kind of run the whole business because creativity walks out the door. Third example, this is not a knock. Apple has created far more shareholder value since Tim Cook came over. Tim Cook was obviously Steve Jobs' COO. He was his right-hand man. He was a master of logistics. So he gets a lot of credit for things like launching AirPods and wearables. That is a huge business. He gets credit for saying, hey, we got all these users. Why can we launch services? He could launch Apple News. He could launch Apple Plus. But engineers and developers laugh at Apple now because they go, there's been no innovation. You're on basically iPhone numbered 18. That's your innovation. Like when a new iPhone comes out and new people replace old models with new, that's when the stock gets a bit of a lift. But my point is, yes, media shot themselves in the foot. Like I studied finance, but I'm not really a finance guy. I'm also not like a writer. I'm kind of a bizarre thing maybe. But like when I'm in the room, I don't mind if my finance guy has an idea on content, but I will assassinate everybody if all of a sudden the accountant decides what to produce and the creator decides like, what interest rate to lock in for something, so goes back to something we said on, it's just comparative advantage, your specialization. So yes, I think media companies, once they brought in the bean counters, it's kind of like you're signing your death wish. And this is coming from a finance guy. It's not that I don't respect them, but that's not who should be running a media company ever.
Let's shift gears and talk about AI a little bit.
It's in the news. I don't know.
I'm hearing a little bit about this new thing called AI, and if YouTube democratized content creation for people online, then AI is going to 100 times or 1,000 times that, with anybody being able to make like, feature length, high quality movies and stuff like that. But is it a slippery slope when it comes to like how much power people have?
We've talked a lot about AI. I've written a lot. If somebody wants to also post in the comments that storytelling and AI, so I don't have to repeat it all, because I don't think, first of all, since we first chatted about it, forget about that. Since 3 weeks ago, think of how much evolved. So like we see the technology and we're like, well, okay. So this is what I'm going to say. Hollywood and people are so full of shit. It's incredible to me, because right now you're getting media companies finally coming out and admitting that they've been using AI for different things. No, tomorrow they're not going to cast an AI version of Tom Cruise in the next Top Gun. They will still pay Top Gun money. They will still pay top dollar for Tom Cruise in Top Gun. But all of those extras in the back, gone. All of those other people who whine and complain. I'm sorry, you're great people. Hollywood doesn't care about you. I'm not saying it. Don't want to sound like Ricky Gervais. Hollywood could care less about you. You're just insignificant line item expense that if they could replace you, you don't add anything in their eyes. Like if you don't get that, you're a moron. Hollywood is full of shit. I'll tell you another reason. All of the people, and I look at this as like an analyst, historian. I see the good and bad in things. I see the practical, the inevitable. What I find shocking is you have a lot of like people whose head is in the sand and they're like, oh, humans and this. Okay, fine. I get that. I'm an anal perfectionist. Yes, I pick and choose. I'm the guy that sometimes loses it when we show the wrong B-roll. Not an error, like the B-roll that isn't more perfect, but I let it slide because we produce so much, right? So I will never let AI content. But however, I'm like, we should use AI because it helps. But the bottom line is you already have established people. For every one Luddite dinosaur that comes out and goes, I hate AI, you have established storytellers that are using AI because they see how it helps, right? So it's like, as much as you got some people who have never done anything, they've worked for 5 years on the same goddamn screenplay, they've worked for 10 years on the same goddamn documentary, like an artiste putting another coat of paint on a canvas, but not really shipping product. Meanwhile, you have established people that are like, this is great. I can now do more. I could convey. My thing is with AI is I'm very polite. And I'm always like, hey, Rob, if you don't mind, maybe, you've seen my style. When I'm just asking ChatGPT for research or to prove a hypothesis or fake it, it's instant, it's immediate. So yes, I think that AI is just going to be like technology where it will be integrated in steps and products. We will not actually call it AI. It'll just be the way that if I work at a travel agency, there is a time for me to pick up the phone. There is a time for me to Google Kayak or Expedia. There is a time for me, maybe not any more facts, but to use like an archaic thing. If I need to sign a hotel and I want to book it for a client and like they don't have an email and my client really wants to go to some brothel in Pattaya, fine, I'll fax over the reservation if I must. Like what I'm getting at is it's just technology. And it behooves me that people think that like audiences are going to care, because audiences just want accurate information and entertaining content. That's all they care about. They don't really care about how it's made. Now, somebody on social could go and big principled, I will never, you're a moron, because you also probably use Expedia now. You don't go to a travel agent, right? So I think automation, automation in the Chipotles, automation in the Starbucks, robotics and all these things. I think most clients want that. You don't want passive aggressive, like you had a rough day. I empathize as a human, but I'm already paying way too much for this burrito and way too much for this coffee for you to be putting in a dose of your, of your attitude for me. So I think AI will just be tech. It'll be baked into YouTube tools. It'll be baked into Adobe Premiere, Avid, whatever. You look at Google, you search, it's all AI. I mean, if you don't notice what's happening, search has changed. You're not clicking through. If you want to know when is Call of Duty 8 coming out, you don't really need to go and visit IGN.com. You could Google that and the answer is there. And that's why the IGNs are fucked. And no disrespect to Ziff Davis, that's a well-run company. All these websites, Wikipedia came out and was like, we're basically facing permanent long-term decline in traffic. yeah, aside from your woke garbage or just that your editors are a bunch of fucking crazies, it's not where the world is going. You know, the world is going more instant, more real time. I mean, pretty soon it'll also be audio cues, right? Like that's also, if you combine like AI with voice,
You'll just be talking and getting answers in real time.
Yeah.
It'll
And
be
also
all AI assistants.
but also then executing on it. Like you also give it orders to create what you want to do.
Yeah.
So you'll start projects much faster. When you hit a wall, and again, you'll always need a human of some kind to supervise, oversee. But I just think that, like, you know, even I think the team gets it. I was quite anti-AI, but I viewed it more as tools. I also said we don't want to be like, did this freelancer use AI? Does that person using it? I'm like, let's just be transparent. It's like these idiots. I have kids. I obviously won't do this. Any kid that comes to me and says, my teacher says don't use AI, I would go there and be like, I wanted to teach. I love teaching. But I'm like, this is why you're a miserable person, because you're just so insecure. You're so stuck in your old ways that instead of teaching kids how to use this ethically, properly, you're asking them to just double down on typewriters. This is why you're miserable, because you don't get ahead by putting your head in the sand.
What are the ethical implications behind AI? There are a great many of them, and I can imagine somebody coming out with a new movie starring Robin Williams or some other actor who's passed away and getting into a lot of trouble for intellectual property and stuff like that. Like, where's the line?
So I'm not, I want to be intellectually honest and not come across unaware. There is somebody, even if they produce content under fair use, parody news, whatever, that will say, well, Ash, watch Mojo with fair use, even though the rights holders generally like us. There are partners, there are clients. If a company comes and buy us tomorrow, don't be surprised if it's a company we fair use some of their IP. So that argument I also think is worn out, but I do want to address it. I don't want to come across a bit. I think that's also all garbage. Because again, as we alluded to, Led Zeppelin was accusing Kingdom Come, Whitesnake of copying them, but Led Zeppelin fucking was copying Robert Johnson, the black guitarist who was playing acoustics in the 20s or something. But Robert motherfucking Johnson, that's a compliment, was probably inspiring himself and singing songs that his grandfather, his grandmother, some random black guy across the street where he lived that was more miserable, who was even more blues, like singing his heart out. So this is nonsense. Like, I've written thousands of articles. I've written books. I've produced. There always starts with some research. And yes, you credit us in that. So I think what AI, as I said, it just becomes technology, is it flattens some of that research. You more quickly can develop a hypothesis that makes sense to pursue a story, whether it's an article, a video, or you quickly realize, yeah, this isn't the right angle. So I've passed that. I personally don't like, I mortgage my freaking place instead of letting people go. I hate to lose people. But I also don't think you have to get caught up in the sense of like, oh, it's unethical if people lose their jobs. There's always been a shift, right? Like seamstresses, even like certain cooks, even certain, like you go to a resort. I mean, I'm fine to press a button for my latte. If you're that much of a fucking coffee snob that you need a barista to make a coffee, okay, I get it. If it's the world coffee competition, maybe the human, but like 99% of the time, it doesn't matter, right? So I actually don't think that the ethics in a year are going to be anything like the ethics we're talking about. And the reason for that is, if you ask the biggest critic of AI and you say, you're going to hire an assistant tomorrow to help you, a human being, they're going to help you with a pain point that you have. You don't want them to use any AI for anything. They may be like, of course not, but they're an idiot or they're lying to you. Because anybody that hires somebody to do a job using archaic technology and not leveraging the latest learnings is a fucking fool, right? If I hired a travel agent and they said, we don't believe in the Google, Expedia is not a good, useful service as a meta search, I wouldn't want them to be searching for trips for me. Why would I want them to be searching? I'm like, are you plugged into kayak, canoe, Crapster, whatever that the cool kids use these days?
It's like a travel agent saying, I don't believe in airplanes. You're going to go by boat to Europe.
Exactly. You could, but you're like, let me go get a second opinion. So I think there will always be ethics, but I also think that because people are generally, not all, but people are also not dumb. I think it's more like if you respect people's time, if you respect your employees' time, if you respect people, I think the right answer is generally in front of you, and it's not extreme. I don't see anything being just automation or human or just AI or human. I really, really see, depending on the task, depending on the step in the supply chain, some combination where a human starts and machine advances, human finishes, or machine starts, human approves. That could be content, it could be your food. I mean, you go to McDonald's, you've seen the memes, you order a cheeseburger, it's supposed to be a consistent product. It's only consistent, and now the guy picked it up and threw it against the wall there.
Yeah, that's what it looks
So
like.
I would actually be fine if it was fully automated. Like, what is a human adding there? Just, it's a cheeseburger, but it just looks like you sat on it, right? So I think the ethics will be more case by case. Like, if a doctor says, I use AI to see the likelihood that this 30-year-old who is 10 years away from his first colonoscopy, but given their genes, given their family, I'm going to use AI to see if there's a higher chance of colon cancer. That is a smart use. Now, if you're inserting something in a rectum, do you actually think that a human is more precise than a machine?
Well, I think for detailed procedures, machines already outpace humans in terms of, like, machines are doing surgery and stuff like
That's
that.
what I was going to say. So if your doctor who has a God complex says a machine is what I use for precision, then anybody that sits there from home and being like, oh, I feel bad for the doctor that got laid off because of AI, it's moronic, right? So I don't get caught up in like the virtue signaling ethics that people of an era talk about. I generally do look at like, well, what will be a topic of discussion in 3 months or 6 months? So I think that's why I said that thing on storytelling. We talk a little bit about other industries. It's really going to be step by step in a supply chain. It also has to do with the person, right? Let's say you, as a storyteller, you're really bad at like fact checking. You have a short attention span. You're great at writing, your prose, your alliteration, your metaphor, your similes. Your English teacher has a fucking hard on every time you press publish. But that's a bit disturbing because my English teacher was a she, so that's just forget about that. Great lady, explains why I'm proficient in English, but very disturbing analogy there. But what I'm getting at, focus, is again, it's case by case, right? Like if you are good at something, you might want to double down on that. But then AI or the technology just helps you cover your blind spots. So I don't overthink the ethics anymore, because I think you could sit around and talk in abstract and you lose your lunch and you lose like your quality, you lose your raison d'etre.
Yeah. We've also spoken a lot lately about the kind of decline of Western culture that we've been seeing over the past few years. And you can see in the media, some of the most viral things. We mentioned K-pop Demon Hunters, Squid Game. Some of the biggest shows and movies have been like coming from foreign countries. So how does the Western media's decline factor into the changing technologies that are developing?
So that's two questions, if I may. Your first question is just like the rise of global IP and trends and kind of like, what's that all about? And then the second one, which I think is a bit more interesting, is like, well, what the hell were they doing in America and Hollywood to lose that attention for a Squid Game to become like a popular thing? So one, the internet is global. Like online, you have to be either extremely local or extremely global. Like you can't really be in the middle. Like, okay, you're New York Times, you have a business, but generally you have to pick an extreme, unfortunately. So I think because there are so many people who do not in their market have as rich of a history of programming, like in America, you could binge all of the catalog of Disney and Paramount and Columbia before you even get to the TV archives, and you have enough to stay busy for on and on for years. But if you're like in Korea, I'm sure there's obviously local producers, but it's not as industrious going back, right, as other countries like America. So what ends up happening is the odds of the local hunger for local programming. Like, why is it that WatchMojo Espanol does better when they cover original stories and IP than when they just localize the Batmans? It's normal. It's human nature. You want what's natural to you and what doesn't feel alien. So I think the combination of that local thirst for new stories and new this and that, multiplied by the global nature of these platforms, think of Netflix, multiplied by this is when sometimes capitalism and greed is good. If you're a Netflix executive and you're like, hey, we have 13 million people in Korea, how could we serve that more? Where it's not people paying less for a membership, low advertising rates vis-a-vis the US. How could we serve them, right? So it's really a confluence of, again, technology, consumer behavior, economics. Now, we touched on this, your other question. Yeah, I just think if you just repeat what the media execs are saying, there was an article from Disney where they're like, we need to reach young men 13 to 35. We just have not done a good job. And yeah, if you hire nothing, I love like Latin people. I lived in Madrid. It's probably after North America what I identify with the most. But if you're going to hire a Hispanic girl to play the role of a girl that was like a white character, and she goes on and on about how much I hate America, yes, you got a marketing problem on your hand. You know, you could, I would never silence somebody. You're Gal Gadot, you want to go out there and say, I love Israel, or you're Javier Bardem and you say, I love Palestine. And I'm like, it's your opinion. I commend you. But that's what's been going on. Most people don't want that. We cover things peripherally when we do like the America's Change. It does well. So there's clearly an audience that wants that. And then we get like accused of everything. So imagine if you're Disney, you try to tune into even what Snoop said. Snoop, what he said was pretty tame. He goes, my nephew said, how could these two ladies have a baby? Like, that's what a child would ask.
Yeah, that was in reaction to the Buzz Lightyear movie or something.
Now, there's a wrong answer, absolutely wrong, if you're like, yeah, well, these two sinners are going to hell and will burn in that, like that is wrong. Yeah. But I think if you're a parent and you're like, I don't know, we'll talk about it after the movie, Skippy, that is what you've been doing, The
problem was the lack of authenticity in what they were doing. You could tell it was like what we said, it was a business move, and it just so happened to backfire on them.
I personally will never change two parts to this question. So long as I'm around, I will never, for example, it's different. We had a channel that was geared more to the LGBT community, but like I will never 1 month of the year be like the Watch Mojo logo changes colors, because I don't want that to be the perception that for 1 month we put a hashtag and a logo and
the rest of the year you don't give a shit.
I'm like, every year treat people with respect. Don't discriminate. If somebody is different, great. And that goes the other way. If you are like a woke person and you disagree with somebody that's not, yeah, they may not be a Nazi. They just have different values, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was totally fake. And I think people saw through that. But then you also had the emergence of the internet and shorts and, creators that exacerbated this reality where you were more and more out of touch. Like Hollywood has always been out of touch with mainstream America, but they kind of made their bed and they're fucked.
In conclusion, can you give us a quick rundown of your opinion on where things may be going over the next 5-10 years in media?
Well, first of all, nobody could predict, but I will say this, if history repeats itself, I think YouTube is about to enter its golden era, because YouTube already did a lot of things to kind of clean up their own excess. Like even yesterday, Neil Mohan came out and said, U.S. employees voluntary, you could quit. Like, we'll give you some severance. We don't want to. Like, they just came out, Google, with $100 billion in revenue for the quarter. They can't be like, oh, we're laying off a bunch of people. So they're like, if you want.
Why Microsoft did that?
But, well, and Amazon did too. No, like they don't care, and that's fine. It's not Reverend Bezos. It's not Mahatma Patel or what? Not Patel. The gentleman from Microsoft. I should know this. The point is, they're in it for money. That's right. So I think in 5 years, what will happen is TikTok will not disappear, but TikTok to me is more of like a Facebook watch. It's like a flash in the pan. The Chinese government would have to want to stick to media. ByteDance would have to want to stick to media. Those are a lot of ifs, whereas there's no doubt in my mind that Google will be like, we're going to triple down on YouTube, right? So what I think will happen is YouTube is going to become such a dominant platform that the whole world will gravitate to it. You will probably see sports, the way you tune into Fox, you'll tune into YouTube, if not already, YouTube TV, to watch sports. News will probably also at some point be like, okay, the audience is on YouTube. It may not be of the old days, the Dan Rathers or the crusty old folks, but the news that you get will all just gravitate, not just to the internet, to YouTube. So I see the main story is just going to be a separation between YouTube and everybody else. And I think this talk about AI and stuff will just be moot. It'll just be like, hey, if I'm looking for information on prostate cancer, I'd rather if it wasn't a human. I work with humans. I see the mistakes you guys make. I love you all. It's almost like an experience. You know, the form factor is almost why I want it. Or I'll buy a magazine and I'll steal one if I'm at a hotel, perhaps, and I'll just put it on my desk as like, just decoration, right? Like it's role changes.
Yeah.
So it's human and machine will become more and more one. And there will be really no difference between like social and professional and UGC and all. But I just think it'll be YouTube's world. And I think more than ever, many will not be able to adapt and compete there. And that's what's going to create a whole new era of kind of what we've talked about. I'll land here. The new media franchises. Mrs. Rachel. 5 years ago, she was unknown. Now Vanity's giving her awards. Glamour's putting her on the cover. Joe Rogan could be a media company. Like I'm just saying, like that's going to be more and more, and it'll be heavily, heavily YouTube centric.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. In 10 years, when I watch this again, I will hold you to your predictions.
Sure. I'm sure I'll be easy to find.
Yeah, definitely. I'm totally going to do that. All right.
Set a date.
Thanks,
Set a date.
Exactly. All right. Thanks always for your time. Thanks everybody for watching. And we'll see you guys next week with another episode. Take it easy.
Cheers.